All right. I'm hoping, class, that all the technical aspects of this video recording have been worked out satisfactorily prior to beginning this, which is session 2 for our Introduction to Graduate Research course, R-101, which is one of the requirements for your being able to matriculate into the graduate program of Asian Christian University. We have had one session already for this week of August the 26th, 2019, and I urge you to go back and look at your syllabus to be reminded of the plan of study for this entire semester. You will see for this particular week, the beginning week, as I have plotted out our course for this particular class. We were to have read and explained the syllabus last time. It is expected that you have already watched that video. And if for some reason you did not find the link or you were not able to watch that video, I urge you to stop watching this one at this time and go back and locate the video to session number 1 for week number 1, which is called Review and Explanation of the Syllabus. It's actually just an introduction to the course. It tells you what to expect, what kind of course it is, what we're trying to accomplish. So you need to watch that and try to see these in order. Let me also remind you as we begin this session 2 that I have certain requirements of you that are really necessary. If you will please, each week let me know by means of an email to my email address, which is posted in the written syllabus, when you have watched a given video. I need to know that. In other words, I need to know who the students are. As of this moment, I have not received a list or a roster of student names. I need to know who you are. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and remind me if we've had courses together in the past in your undergraduate work. I'd appreciate that. Just a brief note is all you need to write about, and tell me which session you have seen. For example, you can say, for a given time, Dr. Gray or Brother Gray, I have completed watching session number 1 for the first week. And if you have any questions or any comments, that would be a good place to include them as well. So do that if you would. Go back and be sure to do that. Now, if I don't hear from some of my students, from all of you, within a reasonable period of time after I post these videos, I'm going to have to get in touch with the administration and have them to come to you and find out why it is that you're not able to send me an email in a timely fashion. That is, if that were to happen, and I hope that it will not. But I do need to hear from you so that I'm aware of your progress, since, as I explained in the last session, we will not be requiring formal exams in this course as we do for most other courses. So with that being said, let's turn now to the subject matter for the next few minutes that I want to explore on the purpose and the goals of graduate research in general. I'm going to ask a couple of basic questions and try to give some answers. What is graduate research? And secondly, why do it? Why have graduate research programs among churches of Christ? Or why do they exist in general, we could ask. Well, first of all, what is a graduate research program? What is graduate research? Just in the most general terms. Well, in a sense, anybody who does special investigation is involved in research, or it is sometimes pronounced research, depending on the region of our country where you are from, or from other countries where you may be from. You know, anybody who continuously studies a given matter after graduating from school is engaged in graduate research, because he or she has already graduated, but now is continuing to research. And research can be defined in a number of ways. My definition would be that research involves careful investigation of any subject area, and it is an investigation that seeks to eliminate personal bias, in other words, prejudices on my part, as much as possible. And it is an investigation that tries to follow strict methods for uncovering the facts that will allow me to gain accurate knowledge of the area that I'm studying. There are various kinds of programs that can be studied, or subject matters, and they will involve different methods for research. We will get into those methods later on in this course of study, but this is simply to introduce what we're trying to accomplish right now. You know, there's a sense in which you could say all evangelists in the churches of Christ, all gospel preachers in particular, should be willing to keep on studying. Just keep on studying, even after finishing school. Now, I have known of colleagues of mine who don't like to study, and they completed a period of classroom work, 2 years, 4 years, or whatever. Some even graduate work at certain levels, but they don't like to study. I'll be frank about it, and they don't do much of it. Now that they're involved in ministry, they think they can coast. They can just slide based on what they learned in the past. And that usually doesn't work out for a man of God. We need to keep on learning, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. But the Bible continually tells us, exhorts us, and admonishes us to grow in knowledge. 2 Peter 3:18, for example. This is one of our Christian duties. And it is a responsibility, particularly as a gospel preacher, to keep on learning as much as we possibly can learn that will be a benefit to those that we are teaching. You see, we ourselves are teachers, and there is a greater responsibility, as James points out, for those who will teach. We will be judged by a stricter standard. This means we need to do more to be sure we know what we're talking about and we can remember what we studied. So we go back and we continue to study either in private or in a public setting, that is an academic setting, as in a school. Because we know that we forget things. We need to remind ourselves of vital truths we've already studied in the past. We might have learned those things on our own, but we keep on studying now in order to be able to remember them. We might have learned those things in a classroom setting, in our undergraduate work, for example. And our minds are such that we usually can't retain all the details of what we've studied in the past. We can't remember specific details for extended periods of time. Now, some few do. There are some with photographic memories, but most of us are not so endowed, so we have to go back and work at it. We have to study. Some have said that our minds are kind of like a leaky water bucket. A leaky bucket. We can fill the bucket with water, and it will retain water for a while, but there are a few small holes in the bottom of the bucket. So there are leaks that develop through those holes. Our minds are like that because of our tendency to forget. We fill our minds with knowledge, but over time, that knowledge begins to wane. We begin to forget things. We need to remember. So we have to continue to pour in more water into the bucket because of the leaks at the bottom of the bucket. So we don't want all of the water to leak out. We want to have our minds filled with information that will be useful to those who are our hearers, our auditors. In a classroom setting, we might be teaching, a personal work setting, or even when we're preaching the gospel from the pulpit. You know, we also realize that we only had a limited amount of time to study while we were in our undergraduate program. Now, I'm not sure about your particular situation, and I'm addressing this to every individual student in this class. You probably have had at least the equivalent of 4 years worth of undergraduate work. Now, I am at a loss because I'm not in the Philippines and do not know your academic system that well. I only can relate to my own. And I think there are many similarities. There are, of course, some differences. I would hope that you're able to adapt and to be able to adjust your understanding of what I'm trying to explain based on my knowledge of our own system here in North America. And it's one that's similar to Europe. The idea is that you go to school for 4 years, generally, and receive a bachelor's degree. We'll talk about those in more detail in a future session, the Lord willing. But just quickly, let me remind us. You could have gone and studied maybe in a 2-year program here in this country and received an Associate of Arts degree or an associate degree of some type. That's generally 2 years worth of studies at the collegiate level, the university level. That's beyond the secondary school. We have here our primary schools, our grammar schools, middle schools, and high schools, generally consisting of 12 grades here. And after the 12th grade, you have finished secondary school, and then you're able to enter into college. Some programs are called junior colleges. They consist of 2 years. Others are just regular college or university programs. Undergraduate programs consisting of 4 years of study. I will assume you have done that. And now you need to go and realize that you only were able to cover so much ground during those 4 years. As much as you studied, you didn't study it all. Take, for example, the area of church history. Some of you are fascinated by that particular area of specialization, and should be. It's very helpful for us understanding what the Word of God says concerning the church of our Lord Jesus Christ and its apostasy and the need to restore it. It's good to know that. You studied maybe a few courses in that area. But even if you took all the courses that were offered at the undergraduate level, if any was, for that period, for that subject matter, you didn't study it all. You couldn't have. There's just too much to learn. There are just too many details. You had to arbitrarily pick and choose. Arbitrarily pick and choose certain areas to study, and you had to leave out others. We say cull others. You had to cull others. C-U-L-L. Just as you cull fruits. You have a basket of fruits. You choose the best fruits. You cull the bad fruits, the rotten fruits. And so it is with our studies. We have to leave out much that we cannot possibly study for lack of time. So we go back to school again. We engage in graduate research in order to cover some of those areas that we had to cull, maybe that could have been valuable, but we just didn't have time to study them at the undergraduate level. There are certain courses that we probably did study. I hope that you had opportunity to study, that I will call foundational courses, in contrast to, let's say, textual courses of study. When I'm thinking of foundational courses, I'm talking about courses in church history or courses in hermeneutics, the science of biblical interpretation. I think, this is just my opinion, my personal opinion, that any gospel preacher who studies in a formal course, rather at the undergraduate or graduate level, whichever level, should be able to take at least one course in hermeneutics. Christian evidences. It has been my privilege to teach such apologetic courses at the undergraduate level in the past, and I hope to do so at the graduate level also, the Lord willing, if I am needed in the future. Courses in homiletics, which of course you remember, would be courses in learning how to preach and developing your preaching skills. Courses in introduction, either to the Old Testament or to the New Testament. Survey type courses, where you're not able to sit down and read all of the text, just selected portions of the text of a given book, or books, and you survey. For example, a survey of the life of Christ. Now you take information from all the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and put that together, and even a few scattered references in the epistles to learn about the life of Christ and the teachings of Christ. But you survey that. You just look at the broad outline, and you cannot deal with all the specifics you would like to study. Then there are textual courses, of course, as in the Old or New Testament. Maybe at the undergraduate level you studied Genesis, Exodus, and you learned a lot about those books of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, but you didn't get a chance to study at the undergraduate level from the rest of the Pentateuch, from Numbers and Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And now maybe you'll have an opportunity to do that if you go back to school and keep on studying. Just keep on going back to school. The same is true in the New Testament. Maybe you studied the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but you really didn't have an opportunity to study from the Gospel of John, which is in a category of its own as we've come to understand the Gospel records. Now, maybe at the graduate level you can take a course in John and shore up your knowledge in that area that was left deficient, perhaps, at least in a formal sense, in a formal academic sense, at your undergraduate studies. It's assumed that you're going to be able to cover such things you did not cover previously at the undergraduate level. And graduate school may be the best time to do that. But even then, at our graduate level of studies, everything is arbitrary. By that I mean it's just a matter of convention or custom. There's no law written in heaven or even in nature's book. Certainly not a scripture that would dictate you take 4 years for an undergraduate level of study, and then another 2 years for a master's degree, and maybe another 4 years altogether beyond the graduate or undergraduate degree to get your doctorate. That may be how it generally works out because of certain conventions, societal conventions or customs that have arisen over time. In the case of European traditions over many centuries. So there is some capriciousness involved. But you have to stop somewhere. It's impossible to go to school all of your life, although I've nearly done so, but not literally all of my life. But I have known a few men who do stay in class virtually all of their life. There's nothing wrong with that in particular. if you're able to do so. But there comes a time when you have to get out in the real world, we say, and actually get the job done. You can still work while you're studying, of course, and that may be the case for many of you. You may already be involved in your ministries while you're taking these courses for your graduate work. But usually we just have a minimal amount of time in our lives that we can set aside for our studies, and we hope to make the best of that time while we have it. So we have undergraduate courses, and they may involve several things, even secular courses, not necessarily just biblical studies. And you need those secular courses. I recall years ago when I was a young man, I wanted to enter into a preacher's school. And later on in another study, we will look at the difference between what we call here in North America preacher schools as opposed to undergraduate schools, liberal arts colleges, graduate schools, etc. I wanted to enter into a local preacher school, which was a 2-year intensive program of study, right out of secondary school. I was only 18 years old, right out of high school. But a relative of mine, a member of my own extended family, who was a teacher in that preacher school at the time, counseled me not to do so, and I was surprised. I thought he would want me to be a part of his school, and he said, no, at your age, you need to go to undergraduate work, do undergraduate work in a liberal arts college. You need to go to some university like Freed-Hardeman or Faulkner or Lipscomb or someplace where you can be exposed to a wide range of studies, not just biblical studies. That will be a part of it, but also studies in English composition, history, science, mathematics, and other such things that you will need for a well-rounded education. There are some preacher school programs which do suffer from that deficiency. They provide a lot of information about the biblical text, but their students may not be very adept at the use of the language or have writing skills or the ability to use English grammar, if your language is English that you're teaching in order to be able to be most effective. So we talk about these undergraduate programs as liberal arts colleges, liberal arts, and here the word liberal is not being used in the same way as it is used in theological context. You're not talking about liberal versus conservative. Here, liberal has to do with liberty, liberty to study. I'm not sure exactly of the roots of this usage here, but liberty to study even secular matters such as grammar, science, history, and so on. So you need a well-rounded study at that level. And I assume that you get that. Generally, when we get more at the graduate level, we leave behind such secular courses, although from time to time such courses may be required as leveling courses to level our knowledge where there might have been some deficiency. But you generally specialize more and more in religious studies in the case of a religious graduate school. So we need to learn more. We can do that either in private or in school. There are many self-made men. Now that expression here in the United States means a man who is able to study on his own. He may lock himself in the privacy of his office for many hours on end each day with his Bible in hand, with other resources in hand, and do a lot of reading and gather a lot of information by his own reading. Or he may listen to tapes and broadcasts or podcasts and things like that. Look at videos that are reliable videos and learn much on his own without being a part of a formal classroom setting. And I've known of many great gospel preachers here in the United States who, in days gone by, distinguished themselves for their ability to do that. And they were very capable, knowledgeable students of the Word of God. Very good preachers. I'm thinking of our brother Gus Nichols, who did have some formal education, but he didn't go on to higher graduate levels of study to my knowledge before he passed away. But brother Gus Nichols, a name well known here in the United States, did a great deal to promote knowledge of the Bible, sound doctrine as well. There have been many like him. Another name that comes to mind is our brother Franklin Camp. And at times I would hear some well-meaning brethren perhaps disparage those good brothers for not having spent more time in the classroom. And they would insult them even and say, your knowledge is deficient because you didn't go to school. Often there would be a little arrogance involved with that sort of criticism. I went to school, you didn't. Therefore, I consider myself superior to you. That's the mentality. Brethren, we must avoid that mentality. I'm going to set aside a whole study, the Lord willing, in in future sessions where we will talk about that problem. But suffice it to say now, we must be careful. Self-made men can be very effective. But most of us, and I will include myself particularly in this, are not that good at studying on our own. There are certain advantages to studying in a classroom setting. One advantage that comes readily to mind is a simple matter, but it can be important in some contexts. If all you do is gain your knowledge from reading books, that's good, and you can go to a dictionary and get an idea of how to pronounce new words that you learn, but you're not always able to pronounce them exactly the way the standardized pronunciation would have you to pronounce them. When you go to school, you begin to learn to pronounce words as educated people pronounce them. Your teacher has learned from other educated men and women in some cases how to pronounce certain technical terms, so you don't make the mistake of pronouncing them wrongly or incorrectly. Now that seems like a little thing, but what it does indicate often is that if a man is a self-made man, he's well-read, he knows a lot. He may know much more than even the man, his counterpart, who's gone to school. But it may be obvious that he did not go to school because he's pronouncing things in a strange or idiosyncratic way. And we would like to avoid that. We would like to use standardized pronunciation so that we don't stick out in a crowd and sound funny when we pronounce technical terms or place names, for example, from the Bible. We can learn much from others. I'll give a very quick example that comes to mind. In the English Bible, in the older versions such as the King James Version of the Bible, there is a word that's often used, a verb, C-O-M-P-A-S-S. C-O-M-P-A-S-S. And it looks like the word compass, which is an object for finding directions. Everybody knows what a compass is. Well, when it's used as a verb rather than a noun, often we will pronounce it compass. And that's just a tendency in American English. The noun will be compass, but the verb we will pronounce compass and put the stress on the second syllable. And I always thought that was correct. As I saw that word written down, I assumed that was correct. And yet, after being in school, I learned from educated speakers that generally we don't change the pronunciation of that word. We would say compass about. For example, the army compassed about the city. You may find a reference like that. Compassed the city instead of compassed. Now that really doesn't make a whole lot of difference, you may say, in giving the sense of the text. But it's just a little thing that helps to indicate that we've done our part in studying. And there are many such instances. That's just one that readily came to mind because I heard it just the other day. So graduate work will help you to learn, and any kind of formal schoolwork, how to pronounce things in a standardized way. Graduate research is normally done in connection with formal studies. You can do research on your own after graduating from school, and you could call that graduate research, but here in this class we're thinking about academic research. So, in order to do such work, we need a graduate school. A graduate school. What is a graduate school? Well, before I answer that, first I ought to ask, what is a school in general? Any kind of school. What is the essence of a school as opposed to, for example, private studies? What are the bare bones, essential elements that make up a school? Any group or organized effort that has the right to be called a school. Well, I have at least 6 elements, and these come from my many years of study. In fact, I have aggravated some of my professors in the past by presenting these as being ranked or hierarchical in terms of importance, saying you could leave out some of them and still have a school, some elements of what we normally think of associated with a school, and still have a school if you only had at least a couple of elements. Well, first of all, number 1, and you may need to remember this, not that I'm going to ask you on a test, you need to know this for your own benefit. It would be a group of students. One student could make up a class. That is feasible. I've been in classes where I was the only student, but you have a student or students, usually a group of students, a group of persons who are willing to get together to pool their efforts collectively at learning a given subject matter or about a certain set of subject areas. For example, learning about biblical studies. a group of persons who are willing to learn. These are the students. Without students, you don't have a school. Somebody says, no, I've seen a school, I've passed by it, and its campus is located to the right of the highway, and they haven't met for several months. There are no students. Well, it's doubtful you could really call that a school in the formal sense. You may have a campus where a school used to meet, but a school has to have students. Number two, a school consists of a faculty, a group of men, in some cases women, depending on the subject matter. Rarely would we think so in terms of biblical studies. I would hope not, and I'll explain why maybe in future studies. But a faculty is a group of men who are willing to teach the students, who are willing to share their knowledge with the students. And this may mean even coaching and guiding the students into the students' own further research and further investigations. Now there are, in this country at least, different philosophies, basic philosophies about how a teacher is to go about his work. There are two basic philosophies, and there are many kinds of sub-points in between. For example, there is a prescriptive or apodictic philosophy, which holds that the teacher has gained a great deal of information. It is in his mind or in his notes, and he will take that information and he will transfer it from his mind into the minds of his students. So it's the transference of knowledge idea. I'll call it apodictic, or the transference of knowledge. He transfers things that he knows by communicating in some way, either written form or by an oral lecture, into the minds of his students. And that's one way. And eventually he tells them all that he knows, and in my case it wouldn't take me very long to do that. It wouldn't take long at all. But that's not generally the best approach, although there may be some interactive ways of dealing with this approach in the second. The second approach says the teacher is to be a facilitator, one who facilitates the student in his learning. Not necessarily that the teacher transfers from his mind many ideas that he has into the mind of the student, but that he shows the student the path ahead. He shows the student the way ahead. He shows the student how to find information on his own, how the student can do that in his own research. So at the graduate level, you generally get into that more of the facilitating type of approach than maybe you did at the undergraduate level. So you have the enabler, the coach, the facilitator. The coach may ask questions. The facilitator may point in certain directions. But you have a faculty, however his approach is to teaching. Students then, and a faculty. And I would say with those two elements, you have a school. Now others would say there are other things that are involved, such as thirdly, a planned course of study, a program of study. In a secular field, this could be in the natural sciences or social sciences. It could be in some other area of the humanities. Or in our case, it could be in religious studies, biblical studies. And courses in a program of study will tend to be grouped around an overall theme, such as biblical studies. Although many large universities, large colleges can offer a number of different themes or subject areas. Fourthly, in order to have a school, you need a library. In fact, I used to say these were the three elements: students, faculty, library. And I still think a good case can be made defending that point of view. Now, by a library, I'm flexible-minded, and I think, you could have one that is a physical library located in a geographic area, maybe on a campus, we'll talk about that in a minute, that will consist of written materials such as books and articles, journals of various kinds, ephemeral materials we often call them, in contrast to books which are in more permanent form, more permanent written form. Or you could have recorded materials that are in a format like this one you're now watching, a video format, or things that are merely audio recordings. There are various ways of collecting information and storing that information in libraries. The important thing is that students have access to those resources in the library. Whether the library is in a central location with all the books and other materials gathered in one place, or whether the library is scattered out over several geographic areas. Maybe some of the books are in one of your teachers' houses, some are in another house. But in order for it to be considered a school library, the students would have to have some access to the information. Materials then are also not just included in the library, but they are classified and they're stored in the library in such a way they can be easily located. And this, in my opinion, is the essence of graduate research. Listen carefully. The ability to find things. The ability to find things. I recall when I was younger, at the time my maternal grandmother was still living. She herself had been a teacher, both in the public school system as well as in church settings. And as a teacher, she had gathered a lot of information and accumulated some wisdom. And before she passed from this scene, this life, she used to say to me, you know, son, it's not how much you've learned already. It's not what you know that you studied in the past that you can remember at this moment. But it's how efficiently and quickly you were able to find what you need to know, even now. Not what you have memorized necessarily, but what you were able to find when you begin to investigate. So if you have access to resources, either over the internet or in your own personal library, and in future studies or sessions we will talk about your need to develop your own library, student. Each of you have your own library as much as you possibly can. What matters is your ability to find things quickly, to put your hands on information, not necessarily how well you can memorize and retain a knowledge of the things memorized for a long period of time. So academic research at this level is not so much imparting a complete head full of knowledge as it is in giving you the skills, enabling you to develop your own skills for finding knowledge on your own as the needs will arise. Well, a fifth element of a school, especially a good school, a developed school, would be an administration of some kind. An administration. This could consist of just one person, maybe the headmaster, he could be called, the head teacher, or the president, one who presides over the school. We use the term chancellor, and there are other such formal terms. Someone or someones who can help to organize the programs of studies. Could be a faculty member or several faculty members acting in that administrative capacity. See, it's necessary to keep records of students' progress, to plot his progress, to know his overall qualifications to enter into a program. Does this student need to enroll in this course? Has he had previous courses that will prepare him? Well, that information may not be remembered by all of the teachers. They have enough on their plate already. But an administration keeps those records. So these are record keepers. These are organizers. They will make sure that good qualified teachers are a part of the program. As the administration is given authority, it will be sure that the teachers are sound and well prepared. And if not, we'll eliminate those teachers and select better teachers. In some cases, the administration may be responsible for taking care of the finances of the students or of the school and the students' finances as they may relate to the studies in the schools. And last of all, and I do rank these in order of importance, last of all, I don't mean to insult any administrator by saying you come number 5 on my list. But again, I think students and faculty are the first two essential matters. And then the third one would be the library, some sort of collection of resources. That's if you have those things, you have a school in essence. But you do have to organize, so administrators are necessary. And then a campus, a place where the school might meet. It could meet in a church building. It could meet in a private home. For many years, I conducted clandestine, that is, secret schools on the island of Cuba. Cuba is a closed country. It's a communist nation. And they didn't allow overt teaching of the Bible in many cases, and so we had to meet in people's living rooms or around their kitchen table. But we had a campus of a sort. It could be a physical campus or even a virtual campus. Now, in our digital world, and I guess you could say, in a way, we're part of a virtual campus. So even a graduate school, any school, and particularly a graduate school that we're thinking about, would consist of these basic components. Well, that was the first question. What is a school? And secondly, why keep going to school? After you have finished school, why go back to school? Well, as I've mentioned before, in a sense, the selection of the number of years that will go into a program of study, the selection of the number of courses that will be required, all of that is kind of arbitrary. It kind of just depends upon the conventions of the men who gather together and form the program of study. We try as best as we can to imitate other such programs of studies. We wouldn't want to have a graduate program at Asian Christian University that's radically different from similar kinds of programs in our schools or our counterparts schools. When I say counterparts, I mean denominational friends and colleagues out there, if such they are. I don't mean close brothers or anything, but friends, people we know who have studied in denominational settings. We don't want to be so different that they look askance at our program and think, well, anybody could have studied that subject matter easily and acquired that degree. We don't want them to think that. We want them to realize that we've put in just as much time and effort as have they. But there's no law in nature or in the Scripture that dictates 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, or 8 years. These are just societal customs or conventions. So you have to ask, if a man has taken, let's just say, 20 courses of study, or 25, maybe 25 would be closer to the actual amount, and I don't know the actual amount, 25 courses of study for his undergraduate work, is he now prepared, completely prepared? Well, why didn't he take 30 courses of study, or 35? See, much of this is arbitrary. We confer degrees arbitrarily. A degree is an intangible measurement of a man's knowledge and skills. And so after so many years we say, yeah, he probably deserves to be called a bachelor. He deserves to be called a master of arts degree. He deserves to be called a doctor, for example, in the case of higher levels of study. Graduate work should enhance our skills. Graduate work should remind us of information previously learned that we may have begun to forget. It will augment or add to our understanding of the subject matter. Now, graduate work, let me hasten to say this, in a sense, is not qualitatively different from undergraduate work. It may be quantitatively different. There are differences in terms of quantity, but not necessarily differences in terms of quality. You don't necessarily have an esoteric or deeper understanding or a secretive understanding of the subject matter once you've completed a graduate course of study than you had at your undergraduate level. For this reason, we can often use the same textbooks and maybe require more for the graduates. Generally, we would do that than we would for the undergraduates, but the same textbooks can be used. And I've been in classes where there have been both graduate and undergraduate students in the same class. And both sets of students would listen to the same lectures. Again, the difference was the graduate student would be expected to read more out of the required readings, out of the textbook, maybe even additional books, supplemental reading, and the graduate student would be expected to do more in terms of term papers, write longer term papers, to do more work. It was quantitatively greater, but not qualitatively greater. So graduate work is not on a higher plane, it's just on a more extended or wider plane of study. So we develop certain areas of specialization. We specialize rather than just generalize. Specialization is a good thing. It can be. We're happy and we're willing for someone to specialize for us. As for example, our medical doctor, our physician. Suppose that you have a ruptured appendix. That could be dangerous and you could die from that. You need to have that bad appendix removed quickly and efficiently. Would you want to go to the local witch doctor or village shaman to get that operation done? Maybe somebody who's just studied the spirits over the years and has never really studied anatomy? I wouldn't, and most of us wouldn't. We're glad that there are specialists. Well, we need some who can specialize also in the brotherhood. For example, there are denominational scholars out there who are making false claims about what the Bible means. They may consider themselves experts in Greek or Hebrew and tell us, for example, the word baptizo, the verb in the New Testament, can mean sprinkle or pour as well as to immerse. They may assert that glibly and say to others, I'm an expert, so trust me. We need our own men who study the matter just as much as they, who can say, no, that isn't correct. For example, in the case of baptizo, the verb only means to immerse. It never means to pour or sprinkle in Greek, in Koine Greek. so we can show that they're mistaken. And we can answer many false doctrines that way. We need specialists who know those things better than the average person may know them. And we can all derive a benefit from our specialists. A specialist is someone who specializes in a certain area. For example, he may specialize in church history, or in apologetics, or in Hebrew, or in Greek. A specialist is sometimes called an expert, sometimes called a scholar in his field. What is an expert? What is a specialist? Well, he specializes. He focuses narrowly on a certain subject area. He doesn't continue to study every aspect of that area, but certain aspects he knows better than others. Someone who learns more and more, that's a specialist. Someone who learns more and more about less and less until finally he knows everything there is to know about nothing. Again, a specialist is someone who learns more and more about less and less and less until finally he knows everything about absolutely nothing. Poof. Well, that's humorous, but it gives us an idea of what specialization could involve. A graduate work has its fringe benefits, as we will see in a future session. We live in a very educated world. Now, we know our faith is not inferior to that of other systems of belief, such as Marxism or Hinduism or Islam. We know that Christianity can stand the test, but we need to prepare ourselves to be able to show how that's the case in dialogue with our counterparts, with those outside of the fellowship. We need to prepare our preachers to answer the attacks that are increasingly being made on Christian faith. Graduate work can help hone our skills in those areas. So, I'm not going to continue to belabor this point in this second session, but want to recap what we've looked at briefly in this session. And that is that a graduate research is done in connection with a graduate school. A school can consist of these basic components: students, a faculty, a group of teachers, that is, a program of study, a library of some sort, collection of resources, that is, an administration, and a campus of some kind. And I hope that all of you will be able to continue in this program of study, this level of study at the graduate level here at Asian Christian University, and that you will be better prepared in the future than you have been in the past. Again, let me remind you, as I get ready to close this session, I need for you, after viewing this session, to stop and to find my email address, philipgray@mindspring.com, philipgray@mindspring.com, and send me please a note saying, I have watched session 2. Tell me when you watched it. Give me the date you watched it, please. If you can remember the time. You don't have to give me the exact time of the day, but tell me you watched the session. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know about them. I thank you again for your time and attention and look forward to being with you in our next session, number 3.